Hi, everyone. I'm Veronica McBeth. I'm excited to be here to talk about a project that was an incredible example to me of the challenges that we can come up against to do the right things in our profession, but also the great work that we can come from to taking a collaborative and an inclusive approach for even a project of this size and scale. As I was talking to Lynn and Elizabeth about the community solutions-based approach, I knew the project, the Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel Project, would be an excellent example. For some background, the Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel, or the B&P Tunnel, is 1.4 miles long and running through a busy and important intersection of the Northeast Corridor, the NEC railroad line. And according to Amtrak, the tunnel is nearly 150 years old and it dates back to the Civil War era. With its age, the tunnel is well beyond the state of good repair needed for the commuter rail, the Mark Penn line, and the NEC is in dire need of structural repairs and upgrades for fire and life safety systems. Each day the tunnel stands as it is, there is a risk of a disaster. The NEC runs for 457 miles in the northeastern US, connecting Washington, D.C. to Boston, and supports over 820,000 trips per day. The B&P Tunnel Replacement Program will allow for a 4-mile section of the tunnel to be upgraded and transformed to help smooth and create a safe passage along the NEC. This transformation with the tunnel, having been newly renamed the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, will include 2 new high-capacity tubes for passenger trains, new roadway and railroad bridges, rail systems, and tracks, and an upgraded West Baltimore MARC station that will be compliant with the American Disabilities Act. While the safety needs are certainly indisputable, the major challenge is that a large segment of the new tunnel alignment goes through the neighborhood of Reservoir Hill, and there will be a significant impact on the people who live there. According to a 2017 Baltimore City Health Department report, 85% of the over 10,500 residents of the Penn North Reservoir Hill community are Black, and located in Northwest Baltimore, just south of Druid Hill Park and bordering I-83, Reservoir Hill sits right in what Morgan State University professor Lawrence Brown calls the Black Butterfly. In a 2016 Baltimore Sun article entitled Two Baltimores, the White L versus the Black Butterfly, Brown talks about the advantages to the white community in the L-shaped part of the city that is geographically closer and more accessible to the economic center of the city. People living in the White L have better access to high-quality food, receive more mortgages, and have access to the city's free bus service, the Charm City Circulator. And those in the Black Butterfly area live in a food desert with little access to high-quality food, have lower access to mortgages, and have access only to the paid transit system. Brown has since published a book based on that premise, as well as the solutions on how to address the gaps created by segregation. This is an effect of the segregationist tactics that were outlined in part 1 of this course. The neighborhood, Reservoir Hill, that would be most affected by the B&P Tunnel Project is within the Black Butterfly. Historically, the community was once part of an expansive and connected community known as Mount Royal. However, like many Black communities in the early mid-20th century, Mount Royal fell victim to a racist urban planning policies that, like so many examples throughout the US, plowed through thriving historically Black as well as Jewish neighborhoods. In this case, the community was divided by the 1963 expansion of Interstate 83, called locally the Jones Falls Expressway, or the JFX, which went through Druid Hill Park and eliminated the north-south streets along the corridor. Not only were many residents displaced, but the community was also essentially cut off from the park, one of the city's major expansive green spaces. During this urban renewal era, the highway project, along with construction of large street thoroughfares around the park and the area, cut Reservoir Hill off from the Bolton Hill, which predominantly is white and wealthier. Bolton Hill was protected during the urban renewal, and it continues to see more investments in infrastructure projects even today. As a predominantly Black community that was historically underserved and disinvested, the residents of Reservoir Hill already had a level of distrust and fear in significant projects like the BMP tunnel happening in their community. So it was not surprising that there was a pushback from the community once the announcement was made. As the Transit Bureau Chief for Baltimore City Department of Transportation at the time, I managed the Baltimore City tasks associated with a multi-party agreement under the National Environmental Policy Act study for the BMP Tunnel Project alongside the Federal Railroad Administration, the Maryland Department of Transportation, and Amtrak. So during this 2-year NEPA study, I oversaw the city's engagement to ensure that all federal regulations and guidelines were followed while also making sure that the community's voice was heard. The NEPA process included over 24 small and large public engagement meetings and increased from the original plan for only 8 meetings. We reviewed various alternatives and associated impacts and supplied assistance with materials, including the environmental impact statement and the record of decision. The initial preferred alignment of the tunnel would impact Reservoir Hill, and the community had concerns about the severity of those impacts. The community had worries about the existing and new tunnels going under their homes and the removal of a large community garden and an existing food desert already, the possibility of eminent domain, vent stacks that would end up in the neighborhood, noise, air pollution, and of course, the potential loss of community cohesiveness due to the displacement of local residents. And as seen on this slide, the preferred alignment that was eventually submitted through the NEPA study was selected after considerable community engagement with people who lived in Reservoir Hill and their city council member, Nick Mosby, who is also a longtime resident of the neighborhood. His major concerns in Reservoir Hill related to the cost benefit analysis of the estimated 7-minute decrease of train travel times. While that might seem like a large win from an engineering and planning standpoint, to Mosby and his constituents, a time saving of 7 minutes on a train that community members would likely never use in exchange for the loss of homes and potential impacts on safety seemed like a great cost to a community. Mosby said this about the project: "The reality is these infrastructure projects have never been to the benefit of Black and Brown communities in the country, particularly this neighborhood in Baltimore. They have already received the short end of the stick, and it's been for a greater good at the expense of Black and Brown communities." As such, he made sure this fact could not be ignored, even for a project that had to be done to prevent impending disaster in the existing tunnel. The project planning team heard these concerns and realized what they were doing wasn't working. So we changed our strategy to ensure that meeting facilitators included our Black team members, which included myself, Odessa Phillip from Macedo Consulting, who led the community engagement efforts, Jacqueline Thorne from Maryland Department of Transportation, and Nakia Mack from the Baltimore City Department of Transportation. The fact that we look like the community and connected with them on their terms while also serving in leadership roles helped establish and maintain trust. We also changed the format of the meetings to be less formulaic and more flexible with meeting formats and the frequency. The community engagement process included over 24 meetings, with a lot of time spent listening, explaining, and ensuring that we would take as much time as we needed to explain the scenarios of this tunnel alignment. The meetings and interactions with this historically Black community did not start without their challenges, and the consultants and rail company leading the project needed to understand the nuances of what had happened with major infrastructure projects in the past. And they needed to understand that representation matters from the project team level, and that it's important to meet people where they are, using layman's terms so everyone can understand the scope of the project. The neighbors were used to officials coming in to tell them what was going to happen to them and for them, instead of asking them about their needs and having interactive engagement early and often. Lynn and Elizabeth will go into more detail later on about the specific elements that align with the community solutions-based approach, but the project's public engagement successes were related to the project team intentionally establishing trust and relationships with the community throughout and beyond the planning phase. In this case, once the preferred alignment for the tunnel was selected, there was a mitigation agreement that accompanied the record of decision for the NEPA study for $50 million that would be dedicated for improvements to the impacted communities. Even with its earlier challenges, this project serves as an excellent case study of how to execute meaningful community engagement in otherwise disenfranchised communities. This project is a representation of planning and public engagement as a symbiotic organism, and it shows how equity needs to always be at the forefront of every project and engagement effort. Lynn will be back for the next chapter to begin to look more closely of these stages for the BMP Tunnel Project.